We encourage you to hit the subscribe button right now so you can listen to more podcasts of Operation Truth. Ladies and gentlemen, we do want to hear from you, so we encourage you to email us directly at operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. I want you to know that your messages are likely to be heard, addressed, and listened to on air.
Operation Truth, the show they don't want you to see. Now, here's your host, Lou.
Hello, everyone. This is Lou Palumbo. This is Operation Truth, and as always, with me is my co-host, Tom Fuentes. With us today, we have a very, what I consider to be a distinguished guest and asset to the conversation, a gentleman by the name of Rick Robillard, another FBI agent. He was the head of criminal intelligence for the FBI. I think he's going to bring an interesting perspective to a lot of these discussions that we have. But I want to tell you the impetus to Rick being on the show today, and it deals with my comments about overpopulating the country. I remind people, and I'll go back and set the groundwork for this because I know Rick and Tom are of a slightly different opinion, but population-wise, in 1951, the year I was born, the population of the country was about 150 million. We're about 360 million, conservatively speaking. During the Kennedy years, the population was 180 million. We're now double that. So I've made statements on numerous occasions about one of the issues with the country today that's causing us a problem is management. And the larger things grow exponentially, I've come to learn it becomes exponentially more difficult to manage. These gentlemen don't seem to believe that. They believe we have the assets to do this, which I'm not arbitrating. What my position simply stated is, and this is based on experience, as we grow things, you need personnel to support the exercise of growth. And that seems to be, in my opinion, what's lacking. So we're not completely in disagreement with Rick or Tom, but my perspective or my perception of this population issue is predicated on my own experience in business and other places that I've brushed up against, learning that as things grow, they're more difficult to manage. And I've mentioned to Rick in an email exchange on numerous occasions, we are failing to take care of our homeless, our mentally ill, our aged, our children, our veterans. And by the way, let's add to the list the 10 million plus illegal immigrants that have come into the country that suddenly we're finding them sleeping on sidewalks in New York City in Midtown Manhattan. So Rick, I want to afford you first the opportunity to rebut what I have said, which you've done in email, so we can start this conversation.
Well, thank you, Lou.
Thank you for joining us today, by the way.
Oh, my pleasure. And before I start, I just want to say a thank you to you. A lot of us sit around in our recliners and complain about this or complain about that. And you've taken a step forward to put on a program so we can sit down and discuss these things and try to find a way to offer some solutions. And I applaud you for taking your time, your resources to do that. If everyone did that, I think we would be in better shape. So that's my
Rick,
thank you to you.
If I can just interrupt you, part of the reason Tom and I have undertaken this task with the support of TJ Stone and Brian Williams is because, and I don't think this is a real revelation to you, we grew up in a different America, you and I, Tom, and we're watching the trajectory of this country, and it's not going in a very good direction. And the part that annoys me the most is that these are a lot of problems that we can fix. I gloss onto this discussion about overpopulation. I don't believe in single causality, Rick. I think things on a multitude of levels fuel demise, which is what we're experiencing. People don't realize in this country is we're distracted by taking care of our kids and paying our bills. This country's in a tailspin right now. And unfortunately, leading the charge in the, I would say, disinformation or the intentional misleading of the public is the media, with some help from people in elected positions. But I did want to go back to this initial introduction between you and I, because I know you follow the show, and you brought forth an interesting perspective on this issue about population. So if I'm correct, you think we're populated okay?
Yeah, I do, Lou. I think what we're all trying to do here is differentiate between symptoms and problems. I think as we look at at our country, it's kind of surprising that, at least according to the recent census information, the birth rate in the United States is very low. If we did not have immigrants in the country, the current projection for our population is that it would actually decline to about 226 million by the year 2100. So as a country, we absolutely need immigrants. There's no question about that. Even with all the people coming into the country, the growth in our population over the last 1 year period of time counted was only 0.38%. So I think that's just to provide a context. As I look at our country, I see a lot of things, but I see a country who doesn't show the characteristics of overpopulation to me. For example, the obesity rate in the United States is 42%. That doesn't sound like a country that has too many people. We export food from this country. We provide other countries with foreign aid. We, even in the city of New York, which I've visited twice and you've lived in, 98%, almost 99% of the population have homes. It's 1% of the population that's homeless. So I see a surge of people coming into the cities. I see a surge of people coming into the country. And that creates a short-term overpopulation or overcrowding problem. But the country as a whole, I just am not seeing signs of an overpopulated country.
Well, you see, but Rick, my statement, my position is predicated on the fact that we're not managing. I hear everything you're saying.
Yeah.
I heard what you said about obesity. It means we're eating. I heard what you said about people with living in homes, 98%. I got that. I agree 100% with you. But I'm looking at a different picture here, and that deals with our ability to take care of the people here, independent of those that are eating too much, perhaps, and owning homes. We've got multiple demographics, irrefutable. Veterans is one demographic. The homeless is another demographic. Our elderly are another demographic. Our children are another demographic. Our veterans, which is just sinful, and this has been going on for decades, even prior to Shinseki under the Obama administration, we've been just remiss. So I hear what you're saying, and that's why I say we're not that far apart on the argument, but I do believe in this concept that less is more. Now, you just mentioned something interesting about the growth of the population. We're at, in essence, a zero growth, right? But we're letting in people that we're not taking care of, Rick. You see what I'm saying? So we're continuing to fester this problem of introducing more bodies into the discussion without our ability to support them. I said when we opened the show up, we not only do a disservice to the homeless and the veterans and the mentally ill and so on and so forth, but we're letting people into the country that Tom and I have spoken to on occasions. We don't have enough assets to vet them. We don't have enough assets to assimilate them. Not that anybody's really interested in assimilating into America today. That is quite evident. And if we had to deport them, we can't deport them. So there's a lack of foundation here that lends itself to supporting larger numbers of people. That's where I stand on this thing.
Do you think that the issue is not so much that we don't have the resources, we don't have the capability, as much as we are just not managing well?
I think, and this is another experience of mine. You know, I own a private business, private company. I own a very successful executive protection company. The secret to my success was not growing it beyond my ability to manage it. This is the sad reality of the discussion. Every time you brush up against people to depend upon them to do something they're supposed to do, they let you down. That's just how it is. The common denominator to everybody that owns a business is we all cringe when we have to start to hire people. Now, my process isn't as problematic as other businesses would experience because I come from a real narrow lane. I hire current or former law enforcement agents, all of whom have been referred into me. So I have a minimal amount of employee problems, but my problem is getting enough people to support demand, which is why I don't solicit business, Rick. Believe it or not, business is referred into me. This way I can set the stage and allow myself to grow the company proportionately with support. I see people in my business like all business. They go out and having lunches and golfs and dinners with people. Then all of a sudden people are calling you up to supply manpower. That's the fly in the ointment, the manpower discussion to carry out the mission that you and Tom both have identified. You're right. We should have the ability to pretty much do whatever we need to do in this country. It's a shortfall of man. That's really what it is. In other words, in an idealistic world, in a perfect world, you're right. A country like ours, we should be able to do almost anything. The reality of it is, and it stares us in the face, we don't manage anything. We don't manage our borders. We don't manage our cities. We don't manage the economy. We're not managing the energy sector. We have this big problem of telling the American public the truth on many of these topics to amplify this issue. So that's why I hold my position, which I will not yield on. We're overpopulated. Tom, I want to bring you in, if I may. Rick, if you'll let me bring Tom in.
Please.
Because you and I have had an exchange on this ourselves, Tom.
I think, Lou, from my perspective, it's that we choose not to devote the resources that we need to manage the problem. So when you look at the people pouring across the southern border, that's a policy decision. That's not incompetence on the part of our border officers or the governments along the Texas-Mexico border or any of that. That's a decision made by the President of the United States to leave that border wide open, no matter what the consequences, no matter if thousands of Hamas or Hezbollah pour across the border and do damage to people in the United States. It's as if we don't care. So I look at situations, is it being under-resourced because we don't have the capacity to devote resources, we don't have the resources to assign there, or is it just we choose not to? We had resources assigned at the border during the Trump administration. What happened in 3 short years that they disappeared? Or the cooperation we used to have with the government of Mexico, it's disappeared. The Remain in Mexico policy for people seeking asylum in the United States, that's disappeared. Those are all policy decisions. That is because we've suddenly been faced with some catastrophic natural disaster, hurricane or tornadoes or something that make it impossible for us to put people to solve these problems, as we choose not to. Simple as that.
Tom, you're 100% right. I mean, none of what you said is invalid. It's true. You're 100% correct. But I want to point out something to you that has resonated in this country for presidential administrations, which really came to the forefront during Obama with Shinseki, with the veterans. Okay, that had nothing to do with this administration. That problem has been festering for decades. In fact, let's go back to Vietnam. Rick, I know that you're a veteran, and I'm sure this is something that's near and dear to your heart. Look at the reception and the way we manage the Vietnam veterans coming home, Tom. You're right, I got it. We have the ability, but we don't have the desire or the drive to do it. But that's all part of the leadership issue, which is resonating through the company. In other words, guys, I do realize in a perfect world, we should be able to manage what we have in this country. But we have to come to terms with the fact that man is faulted and frail, and we live it every day. There's another issue here, guys, about this population discussion. I mean, are we on track to become India and China? And I'd like you both to take a look at both of these places. Now, we're not close to the billion-person mark yet as far as our population goes, but we're moving in that direction. I want to ask you guys this. Do we have a certificate of occupancy on the country? Rick, I'm going to come to you first.
I'm not sure I understand. I'm not sure I understand your point, Lou. Could you narrow it a little bit?
Restate it to you. I'm watching
Please.
the way we're populating the country.
Okay.
Right. And there's 2 countries we know right off the bat that are more heavily populated than we are, India and China. And I'm looking at the problems they have. My question is that the trajectory for this country, number one? And let me ask you this: should we have a ceiling on how many people we do have in here? Or are you subscribing to the notion that maybe we could manage 1 billion people? We have 2 exact cases where we can't.
Yeah, I understand now. I agree. I think maybe our point of, I'm not even sure we disagree, to be honest with you. You know, Lou, we have a House of Representatives that can't manage itself. They cannot perform the most basic function that they are elected to do, and that is prepare a budget. They can't even do that. How are they going to manage a country? I don't think it would make any difference if we drop the population 100 million people. I think these screwballs would still not be able to come up with a budget. They still would not be able to manage immigration. And that's where the problem lies. We
I
need,
agree. You know what,
you
Rick,
know,
I agree 100% with you. I can't arbitrate anything that you're saying. We're having massive systemic failure in this country. But, you know, all we're doing is contributing to the reason why we can't handle this many people. And once again, it goes back to this thing upon our dependency on our expectation as human beings. We could wreck a rock pile, is what I've come to learn in my lifetime.
yeah.
And I'm looking at it and living it in real time in our country. We have 435 House of Representative members. We have 100 senators, and this country can't put one foot in front of the other. That's a leadership discussion. But the thing I want to say this, everybody that's living in this country today, for the most part, is falling under this description as distracted. People are worried about their mortgages, their car insurance, their flat screen TVs, their next generation of iPhones, their children, where they're going to educate them, feed them, clothe them, house them, etc. And we rely upon these elected officials to do what's right in the best interest of the country. So my question is, I go back and say, should we continue to populate the country based on what you and I've just established? You see what I'm saying? I mean, you guys are starting to feed my argument. I'm not arguing with you guys. I agree with you. We have the ability to do anything we want to do for the most part. We just seem to lack the talent to do it, the resolve to do it, the commitment, the dedication to do it. And tell me I'm wrong. So my question, I go back, Rick, is we're at 360 million. What's our certificate of occupancy? Is it 400 million? Is it $1 billion? You see, we're struggling now.
Well,
do you think bringing more people is going to make it better? And that's what we're experiencing that Tom just brought to light. He mentioned this failed migration policy that, by the way, I remind everyone who's listening to this thing, the loudest voices in opposition to this immigration, this border issue, are now becoming Democrats. Just talk to Eric Adams. He flat out came out and said to you, it's going to destroy the city of New York. We've already got a 5% across the board cut in services, cops, firemen, education, sanitation. And he doesn't hesitate to say it's tied to the migrant issue. But here's my question. Should we continue to embrace more people?
I think we should allow as many people. I think, first of all, we have to have an orderly immigration process. We can't have a process where 200,000 people decide to walk across the border and come in our country. I mean, nobody can manage that. We have to have an orderly process, and we have to look at. I mean, I think there's a couple of things we got to realize. So, I mean, we have one of the lowest unemployment rates in the history of the country. We've got 9.5 million open jobs and 6 million people to fill them. We need immigrant workers. We need people to pick the crops because U.S. workers ain't going to do it.
Rick, I got to stop you there for a second.
Go ahead.
You sent that to me in an email,
Yeah.
and I hear what you're saying, and what you're saying is correct. But I think what's important to note is that many people have withdrawn from the employment roll call. And I do agree with your statement. We need migrants. And I do agree with your statement. They need to be brought into the country in a more orderly fashion.
Sure.
And the criteria to get here shouldn't be swimming the Rio Grande. You know,
No.
we're talking once again about what's going on in this administration that didn't take place in a prior administration or two, for that matter. But I agree 100% with that statement. But the other part of this that's true is less and less people are looking to work. So of course the unemployment rate is going to take on a different optic. That's what I feel about that. Do you think I'm wrong about that?
No, but you know, why is it less and less people are looking for work, do you think?
That's a really good question. Maybe because we keep handing it out to the public. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Well, is that it? Is that, did we just say something that's factual? That's a fact.
No, I think so. I mean, my goodness, look at just try to look at this from a kind of a high level. Is we have the employment issue that we just discussed. So in other words, we have essentially full employment in the United States. Anybody who wants a job can have a job. Okay. And we spend $120 billion a year on food stamps. And 40-some% of our population is obese. Can you explain that to me?
No, except that we just have failed leadership. That's the only way I can explain it to you. But I want to be fair to this administration. This problem did not just rear its head right now. Let's be candid, guys. This has been festering for generations. You know what I read recently was that even with the advent and the acknowledgement that we're having an obesity problem, instead of more Americans becoming less obese, more Americans have become more obese. Not
Right.
compounded by, am I right, Rick? Compounded
Absolutely.
by the fact that we now have a mechanism in place in this country where we're encouraging you not to take care of yourself so you can be all inclusive. You know, this is like we're living lunacy here today. But the bottom line, I go back to this whole thing about we're being distracted, and this all ties into one thing. People need to get off their backside and start to vote. That's one thing I can tell you, because I don't know if we're going to survive another administration of this starting next year. Rick and Tom, I want to transition, if I can, into the Ukraine, because I know you're probably going to have some opinions, Rick. Tom, I want to bring you on, and I want to just discuss some of the policies that Zelensky's embraced in regarding to managing people, let's say, that might be perceived to be adversarial in the Ukraine. Tom, can I have you help me with this?
Yeah, he puts them in jail.
Well, that's quick.
Kind of, and that's where Biden and Zelensky admire each other. They follow each other as role models. Zelensky locked up his principal opponent and has him sentenced to many years in prisons. That's Biden's dream, to be able to get Trump put in jail for many, many years. So far, the first step of that is the first 4 or 5 trial, the indictments and 91 charges against Trump. But, Biden would love to lock up Trump for the next 20 years if he could, eliminate, the opposition. So the policies that you're seeing Zelensky follow are much like what people in this country want to have the president follow. Eliminate your political opponents, put them in jail. Eliminate religious leaders, put them in jail, like the Catholic Church in the Ukraine. All the crooked politicians in the Ukraine, they're all enriched. Thank you very much, United States of America. So you have all of these failed policies basically on steroids in the Ukraine. And nobody's questioning, why is it that the Biden administration is giving Zelensky everything he asked for? What's going on there? Do they have something compromising against Biden? Do they have some knowledge of illegal activity he has engaged in? Bribery, corruption, other illegal activity that is often what fuels, bad economies, corruption. Boy, we're following that to the letter. So
I want to go to Rick, if I may. Rick, you have some thoughts on this topic or what Tom just said?
Yeah, this is a topic that Tom and I look at and we see differently. I think that Russia has attacked and taken back portions of Georgia. I think they waited a while. They attacked and took back the Crimea. They waited a while, and now they've invaded the whole of the Ukraine. That bothers me. Aggressor nations, more powerful nations that take landmass by force is very troubling. I think it's our interest to stop that. I think it's in the U.S. interest to put a stop to that, to support the Ukraine to put a stop to that. As far as corruption in the Ukraine, there's been corruption in the Ukraine for a long time. In fact, Rudy Giuliani, a guy named Furman and Paranis, tried to exploit that corruption for their own personal gain. They were being stopped by Marie Yovanovitch, and they convinced Trump to get her out of there. So, yeah, there's deeply rooted corruption. You could make a factual case. In fact, it is a matter of fact that money given to Paranis and Furman wound up in a PAC supporting Trump. That's an undisputed fact. Personally, I don't think Trump knew anything about it. But I'm very hesitant to start speculating as to
Rick,
motives.
I want to ask you a question, if I may.
Go ahead. Sure.
You just mentioned that the United States should be involved in supporting efforts to stop this aggression by Russia.
Sure.
You probably heard me say earlier in this podcast, this episode, that I have no aversion to that. What I'm concerned about is the disproportionate manner in which this is taking place. I cited the fact that 29 of the 31 NATO nations reside on the continent of Europe.
Yes.
How did we suddenly take on $115, $120 billion of this And we have this president right now asking for another $60 billion of it. And he tried to piggyback that on the $14 billion we wanted to give in aid to Israel. You know, not for anything, and I want you to give this some food for thought because I'm going to come at you with this one in a second.
Sure.
I watched the second primary debate with Nikki Haley making a comment that the Ukraine is a cornerstone to the United States. No, it's a cornerstone to Europe. Israel's a cornerstone to the United States.
Right.
But how do you feel about the way we're funding the Ukraine? In other words, you, myself, and Tom are in agreement. We need to support the Ukraine.
Yeah.
My position is proportionately.
I
What are
agree.
your thoughts?
I agree. I think President Trump raised a very valid point there. I mean, I'm with President Trump on this. I think he was right that we are paying a disproportionate amount of money to defend Europe, and they should pay more.
And so doesn't that carry through to supporting the Ukraine in specific?
Sure, absolutely. It's
Okay.
there. The threat is on the borders of the Western European countries. They should pay more, and their failure to pay more puts us at an economic disadvantage. That's just wrong.
So let me ask you this, Rick, if I may, and I'm going to come to you with this, Tom, next. Is your concern the fact that if Russia were to take back the Ukraine, that it would continue into, say, Poland and Czechoslovakia, some of the former Soviet bloc countries? Is that a concern?
It is. I think the logic that Russia is using is very almost identical to the logic Hitler used to take pretty much the same countries, and that is essentially were Russian lands. There are people. Historically, they belong to us. We can just go take them. Well, Alaska belonged to them. Can they just go take Alaska? I mean, there's a portion of Russia that's landlocked by Poland, and are they going to go take that? So I don't know. When do aggressors stop? That's the part that concerns me.
So you know what else I noticed? And Tom, I'm going to come to you with this question. I just want to follow up with Rick, if I may. You know, we are quick to form coalition with incidents or issues taking place in the Middle East. What do you see as the form of this coalition in Europe in regards to response to, and I like this term that the president used, a mild incursion, which would be tolerated. What do you think? What do you think is going on with that coalition? You know, which should be France and Italy and Germany, right, and England and any number of the other European countries, most of which are in NATO. And what should they be doing at this point? Are they doing enough?
I don't know, but you know, Tom is much more knowledgeable about what's going on there right now than I am. So I don't know, Tom, if you
Let's go to Tom. Tom?
Yeah.
Let's go to Tom.
Russia, Putin has never given an indication that he wants to move further east into Europe, to go into Czechoslovakia, go into some of these neighboring countries. What he has said, and what his policy has been for decades now, is to have basically an extremely small military for defensive purposes. He's only recently expanded that in the last year or two, you know, when we became more aggressive in arming Ukraine to go after him. But Putin has said for a long time, he just wants to trade with Europe. He wants trading partners. He just wants his economy to be able to survive, that he was not interested in conquering Ukraine or Czech Republic or any of these countries for the sake of conquering them. Now, that's different than what Hitler did when Hitler was trying to take over neighboring countries because he wanted more land for agriculture. His whole policy of going into Russia, Soviet Union at the time, Operation Barbarossa, was built on that. He didn't want to have a trading partner with the Soviet Union. He regarded them as inferior. He wanted to conquer them and establish the land to grow crops for himself, for Germany. So I think that the dynamic is not parallel between what Putin's trying to do and what Hitler tried to do during World War II. I don't see that as the same dynamic.
I have to agree with you, Tom, in that statement also, and I think a lot has changed since September of 1939 and the country's ability to repel invasion. You know, I want to do something that I want to certainly include Rick in this conversation, And, we're talking about invasions in countries, and something that really has become evident as a result of the Ukrainian incursion and now Israel is the arming of the populace. These countries have, I guess, had somewhat restrictive laws as far as its population being armed. And suddenly we're learning that we're funneling weapons into the Ukraine. And now I understand, and I'd like either one of you to correct me if I'm wrong, Israel that was starting to arm its populace. Yet, guys, we live in a country that every day we turn around, they're trying to figure out another form of gun control that they can impose. I remind everyone, as we have numerous times on this podcast, the notion of the founding fathers was a concern of tyranny, even from your own government, and foreign invaders, which, by the way, I remind you, after we liberated ourselves from the English at the Revolutionary War, they made another run at us in 1812 and burnt our White House. So, Rick, I'm going to come to you first about this. I mean, are you aware that this has been going on? And what's your feeling about this gun control issue in the country? I'm curious to hear what your perspective would be. You were head of criminal intelligence, and I'm sure you brushed up against a lot of these cases.
It's a very tough issue, Lou. It's an emotional issue for a lot of people. I think one of the things that gets a little bit overlooked is what the Constitution actually said was that in order for the states to have a well-organized militia, Congress will make no law to prevent the right to carry arms in order for the states to have a well-organized militia. Well, does that really mean that anybody in the country can buy any amount and any type of gun they want? Was that the intention, or was the intention to have an organized militia? I'm not so sure that. I think the majority of the country feels, and I'm with them, that we could do a little bit more in terms of controlling the types of firearms that are on the streets. I agree, guns don't kill people, people kill people. But I also agree that in an emotional moment, it's very easy to shoot a gun and kill somebody that if you had a little time to think, you might not. A lot of people, people who are going to commit suicide, one of the first things they want to do is get guns away from them. Because in a depressed moment, they might kill themselves. I think there is a value in having some control over firearms. I don't think there's a value in banning firearms. But I think as a country, it's an issue we should take a look at. And
I agree. I agree 100% with you, Rick, and Tom and I agree on this as well. I think we're going to go back and take a look at our Senate and our House of Representatives and our presidencies and their inability to kind of reconcile this in an intelligent manner. You've probably heard me say before that I would recommend that everybody be psychologically trained the way we were when we came into law enforcement. I don't know if you ever heard me say this, but I was residing in California as well as New York. I had a successful operation out there. I ran the Academy Awards. I worked for the Sinatras, a lot of people in the entertainment industry, lots of them. I ran the Golden Globes 14 years. I worked for the AFI, Writers Guild, Directors Guild. When I relocated to Manhattan Beach, California, there was a gentleman there who was a chief, Ernie Clevershaw. And I explained to him what I was doing. I explained to him I was a retired law enforcement agent and that I was requesting a concealed weapons permit. And his response to me was spot on. Not a problem. We're going to send you to the same psychologists or psychiatrists that we screen our police with, both in LAPD and Manhattan Beach, which I did to get the initial permit, which was good for 2 years. The renewal process involved taking the screening again, and that went on for like 5 processes. So what we know is that it works. You know what I'm saying, Rick? It works. So that's just, and I want to say one thing to you. That's just not the simple solution. This is a big discussion that has to be undertaken. But there's something else I want to point out here that I think is highly relevant. Up till April 20th of 1999, with the exemption of this guy in the depository up in the University of Texas, Whitman, I think his name was, we had kind of skipped along without these redundant, massive exercises in killing people. Something's happened to our culture. Something's happened to our children. And up to that point, for the most part, we were incident-free, relatively speaking, in proportion to the number of years we've had these guns in our society. In addition to that, I want to state that Colt was licensed to distribute these guns to civilians with the approval of ATF and our government starting in the 60s. So we went from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, up to 1999, almost without incident. All of a sudden, we've got a gun problem. No, we don't. We have a mental health problem, and we have a failed parenting problem. Let me continue, Rick. So the bigger problem, if I may, is that I believe it was prior to the 1940s, we weren't even serial numbering guns. We don't even know how many guns have been made, but they can say on the conservative low estimate, which I've spoken to before on this show, it's about 500 million. ATF threw out a billion. The horse is out of the stall right now. And I know you and I are in alignment in thinking, and Tom is as well. We need to attack this problem and fix it and address really where the fly in the ointment is. It's with mental health, it's with parenting, but there's also another issue here. We've abandoned enforcement. You can pass all the gun laws you want. I can tell you, I lived in LA. The kids in South Central LA, when they load their AK-47s, and they do it every night, aren't putting 10 rounds in their magazine because California has a 10-round magazine capacity. You see my point? So I think we're in agreement that we need to have some intelligent approach to managing the firearms issue in this country. We also know that we run a NICS check on you, right? When you purchase a gun, we fill out a form 4473, the one that Hunter Biden lied on, committed perjury on, which is a 10-year mandatory felony sentence. And we have no way to check on anything other than the fact you've been convicted of a felony. You know, there's a flaw in this system. You know, I always say this, Rick, and Tom's heard me say this as well. One of the keys to success in life is your ability to stop on a dime and change direction. We need to embrace this. This is not the country of our founding fathers, where the population was projected to be about 2.5 million. You mentioned something about the founding fathers. You're right about that. I don't think the founding fathers ever thought we were going to open our borders to every person on the planet, thinking they were all going to live happily ever after under one roof, because we can't get people on a block to live together in harmony. But I just want to tell you my position with this gun discussion. We should never abandon the Second Amendment. Just take a look at the Ukraine. Take a look at Israel. What we do need is incumbent upon the leadership of this country, which is lacking, to address this issue. And all we want to do is politicize it and throw out catchphrases. I think you'll agree with me with this.
I will, and I guess I'd like to make another point, Lou, for your viewers is, Tom and I, and you as well, Lou, we have been trained in the use of firearms. Between being a police officer and FBI agent, I have 28 years of training in how to handle a firearm. I don't own one. When I retired, I turned it in. I didn't buy another one. If I were to go out and buy a firearm right now, I'm not competent to use it, because that kind of training has to be constantly reinforced. It's a skill. And I think your viewers should understand that if you're going to go out and buy a gun to make yourself safe, it's just not that simple. You really have to know how to use that weapon. You have to understand what's going to happen under stressful conditions. And you really got to think about whether or not you are making yourself safe. If you're going to do it, you can't just get trained one time and you're good to go. You're just like Tom and Lou. And if I had a firearm, I would have to go for continuous training. So bear that in mind, before thinking you're going to go out and buy a gun and make yourself safe.
And that's a point that I make with people about training. And another aspect of this discussion is about learning the law, because a lot of people don't understand the responsibility that comes with owning a firearm. For example, if you display it, I can only speak to you regarding the penal law and the criminal procedural law in the state of New York. If you brandish that weapon, you could be charged with a menacing. If you were to unholster it and the gun be loaded, they charge with a felony reckless endangerment. I speak to this all the time, and my mantra is the same. They go through the same training and education as we do in law enforcement. It's about our understanding and embracing that things have changed. Times have changed. You must change with the times if you're going to survive them. But the real problem here is we have no common sense, logic, reason coming in out of government, along with the fact we lack civility, decency, and respect. When we do talk about these things, you hit the nail. Everything becomes emotionally driven and somewhat, and after the fact, we have a shooting and all of a sudden everybody's raised up. They're angry. I got it. Be angry. It's interesting. I was up in Connecticut, in Newtown, after that slaughter of these 20 children. You talk about failing our kids. And the request for concealed weapons permits skyrocketed in Connecticut after that. You know, what they call opposite of the desired result. Instead of throwing laws at us that tie the hands of the people that aren't the problem, why don't we start to try to fix this problem, enforce our laws, and create some form of protocol that will make people more safe in handling firearms? But we're not, you see, really what we're talking about, Rick, is that this is just absent from the conversation. And I want to bring in Tom, because I know, Tom, you have some sentiment on this as well. What are your thoughts, buddy?
Well, I think that what Rick says is exactly right, that if you're going to obtain or maintain a firearm, you need to have the appropriate training. And a lot of people don't. But, you know, I know in my case, in Rick's case, he didn't need to keep a firearm after retiring from the FBI. You know, in my case, some of the traveling I'm doing within the United States, some of that, I did want to maintain the ability to carry a concealed weapon and go through the advanced training and continuing training to do it. Now, while I was in the Bureau, I was also on the SWAT team and a SWAT leader and the FBI's first on-scene commander in Iraq in 2003. And so, yes, I have maintained the proficiency that I had as a SWAT member, as a firearm instructor, ever since I was in the Bureau. Now, I retired in 2008, but I still have to qualify every year with a concealed carry course here in Virginia and certified by the state police to be able to maintain the ability to carry a concealed weapon. So I do maintain that ability and understand that there's more to it than just running to the gun store and buying the latest gun and running out the door with it. That yes, you need to maintain a level of proficiency, not just you know, in the mechanics of shooting the weapon, but at the time what we called shoot, don't shoot training, which is whether you should pull the trigger, how, not just how to do it, but whether you should in the first place. So I agree with that we do need that level of proficiency. Now, we have seen cases in this country where an off-duty police officer in a church or in another situation has saved lives by having that concealed carry gun when somebody else threatened the public. So we do have cases like that where people have been saved by having someone with a gun in a position to stop the bad guy who has a gun.
Properly trained, Tom. Properly trained, properly educated. You're right. I want to close the show right now, and I want to bring Rick back on, if I may, because I know you've heard this. Rick, if you're there, you know, I had a live radio show in Jacksonville for about 10 months or so, and it went from 5 to 6 Mondays and Tuesdays. And this discussion we're having right now, I had a very conservative demographic call in, very supportive of 99% of the things I said. And interestingly enough, I posed this proposition. I said, I'd like to give you a concealed weapons permit. Would allow you to carry a concealed weapon all over the United States, the District of Columbia, all the U.S. territories, a privilege Tom and I have right now. Only thing I'm asking you is this. We want to vet you and train you and educate you the way we do law enforcement. Would you be inclined to participate? Every single person said they would. But I want to point out something else, Rick, that you may or may not be aware of. We now have 27 states that embrace this policy of constitutional carry, which means if you can see lightning and hear thunder and make your way to a gun store, you can buy the same guns law enforcement's carrying. And to me, personally, that's a little ill-conceived. And most recently in the state of Florida, that was the 26th state. I'm trying to find out what the 27th state was. That's what's going on. Rick, I just want to get a comment from you regarding what I just said.
I would say this, Lou, that politicians care about getting reelected, and they don't care that much about whether or not the means of getting elected damages the country. It's absolutely crazy to have a situation where anybody can walk around with a gun. That doesn't do anybody any good, but I suspect it gets people votes. You know, we also live in a country where something like 70% of the population believes that we should have more controls over weapons. We should have the types of checks you're talking about before a person can buy a weapon. And yet, in a representative democracy, the people we elect to office don't allow that to happen. And I think it's really an issue of pandering for votes. And there's a difference between getting votes and doing what's right. And I'm not sure they always make the best decision. Those are my thoughts.
What's interesting is the voice of calm and reason in this discussion, which should be your government. You know, the problem today, and we're going to talk about this a little bit in the next episode, and I invite you to rejoin us for that episode. The power of the media in this country today just seems to be unabounding and without oversight. And as I say, we're going to wrap the show for today. I want to thank everyone for joining us. I want to thank you, Rick, in particular, for spending this hour with us. If you'd like to communicate your thoughts or become part of this discussion, we encourage you to do that. Our contact information is operationtruthofficial@gmail.com. Don't be shy. And by the way, guys, I remind you, we are right on the precipice of expanding this platform. We need to get this message out to more people. I almost feel like Tom, myself, and men like Rick, we need to go on the road the way they do in these campaigns and start to provide some answers to these problems that are just hamstringing this country. And there's answers for all of them, guys, for the most part. Very few are there not. Guys, I thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.